All right, chapter 7 of book 2 is titled The Mirror of Galadriel. And so they are brought by Haldir to Caras Galadon, which is the city where the Lord and the Lady dwell. And they come to like this big tree, and they're up in the tree, of course, is their house, and it's pretty big. I would imagine it would be the biggest, because, I mean, they're the Lord and Lady of the Galadrim. But the thing is with Celeborn and Galadriel is that they are not Sylvan elves like the inhabitants of Lorien are. They came later, basically for her to rule her own realm with the power of her ring that she bears, which she reveals to Frodo at the end of the chapter. And it says here, very tall they were, meaning the Lord and the Lady. Celeborn, of course, is slightly less tall than Galadriel. There's a note that Tolkien wrote where he says that Celeborn was one of the Teleri. He was held by them to be tall, as his name indicated, silver tall, but the Teleri were in general somewhat less in build and stature than the Noldor, and Galadriel, of course, was a Noldoran elf. She was the tallest of all the women of the Eldar, of whom tales tell. She is man-high, according to the measure of the Dunedain and the men of old, which is about 6'4", 6 feet 4 inches tall. She is a little bit taller than Celeborn, so he may be tall for his people, but the Noldor in general were taller. No sign of age was upon them, unless it were in the depths of their eyes. And Galadriel being very, very old, thousands upon thousands of years old. Galadriel, or Celeborn, probably not as old as her, I would imagine. But maybe almost as old. Of course, elves, as you know, don't age like we do. And so they look younger than we will. But, you know, like it says, according to this, if you look into the eyes of Celeborn and Galadriel, you can definitely see that they're far older. And, of course, they have to bring the elves the news of Gandalf's death. And the elves are, of course, saddened by this. And here we find out what Gandalf's name is among them, which is Mithrandir, which means Grey Pilgrim or Wanderer. And of course, Celeborn's like, well, if I had known that dwarves had stirred an ancient evil in Moria, I would not have been so courteous to Gimli. And Galadriel says, do not repent of your welcome to the dwarf. And here in the Lord of the Rings Companion, they do quote from concerning Galadriel and Celeborn, which Tolkien wrote, which you can find in Unfinished Tales. Galadriel has more farsight than Celeborn does when it comes to the dwarves. And she wanted all the peoples of Middle-earth in the First Age to unite against Morgoth. And so she looks on the dwarves a little more favorably. She looked upon the dwarves also with the eye of a commander, seeing in them the finest warriors to pit against the orcs. Moreover, Galadriel was a Noldo, and she had a natural sympathy with their minds and their passionate love of crafts of hand, a sympathy much greater than that found among many of the Eldar. The dwarves were the children of Aule, and Galadriel, like others of the Noldor, had been a pupil of Aule and Yavanna in Valinor. And, you know, Celeborn, you know, he apologizes, and she talks about how she has been with Celeborn since the First Age, and that before the fall of Nargothrond, they had came east into the lands beyond the Blue Mountains, eventually settling in Lothlorien and in Unfinished Tales in that piece about Celeborn and Galadriel, Tolkien goes into more details about that. And he, there's different versions, of course. He didn't really give a final say on on any of this. But anyway, they are invited to stay there with them, so they stay there for like a month. But to them, it seems like they've been there much, much longer, because time for the elves flows differently than it does for us. Another comment about that is made in the next chapter, and say more there. And of course, this is the chapter, again, as the title says, they are taken to the Mirror of Galadriel. Now, here in the book, Frodo and Sam both go and see visions in the mirror. And she says, "For this is what your folk would call magic." Humans having kind of a misunderstanding of the powers of the elves, and to us it seems like magic, but it's not. Tolkien himself said, "I have not used magic consistently, and indeed the Elven Queen Galadriel is obliged to remonstrate with the hobbits on their confused use of the word, both for the devices and operations of the enemy, and for those of the elves. I have not, because there is not a word for the latter, since all human stories have suffered the same confusion. But the elves are there in my tales to demonstrate the difference. Their magic is art, delivered from many of its human limitations, more effortless, more quick, more complete, product and vision, and unflawed correspondence. And its object is art, not power, subcreation, not domination, and tyrannous reforming of creation. The elves are immortal, at least as far as this world goes, and hence are concerned rather with the griefs and burdens of deathlessness in time and change, rather than with death. The enemy in successive forms is always naturally concerned with sheer domination, and so the Lord of Magic in machines." Tolkien, did look upon machines very favorably, with technology very favorably. It can be used for good. If it's used for, for art. But when you use it to seek to rule over other people and to order the world as you see fit, you then become like a tyrant. All tyrants start with the desire to do good, and they use that desire and it turns to evil. And they can definitely use machines to do these things, and we have seen that throughout history, starting in World War I. And it has just gotten worse, if you haven't noticed, and it's going to continue to get worse. Wizards love magic, because they see that as a tool to get what they want to have done. They can use it to rule over us and to even kill us. Anyway, so we're going to next go into what did Frodo and Sam see in the Mirror of Galadriel. Well, Sam sees, as it says here, he thought he saw Frodo with a pale face lying fast asleep under a great dark cliff. Then he seemed to see himself going along a dim passage and climbing an endless winding stair. This does end up happening in the Two Towers when they're going up the stairs of Cirith Ungol, and Frodo is stung by Shelob, and Sam thinks he's dead, and so has to carry the ring on himself. And then he sees the Shire being torn apart, his dad basically being made homeless, and he's like, "Well, I gotta go home. I gotta leave. I gotta go home." And Galadriel's like, "You didn't want to go home, and you knew when you left home something bad could end up happening." And he's like, "Yeah, I'll get home, but I gotta continue on." And you do. You can't turn back. But of course they will, as you will see, be able to deal with that later. And it is about this point in time Saruman is slowly taking over the Shire. And so Frodo looks, and he sees a figure all clad in white, walking down the mountains with a white staff. And he's like, he's wondering, is this Gandalf on one of his journeys from before, or is this Saruman? Of course, we know the answer. It's neither. Gandalf dies and comes back as the White Rider. Then he sees the sea rising and raging in a great storm, and he sees the black outline of this tall ship that its sails are all tore up, and it is just going up the river. And this is a vision of the past. He's seeing the Númenóreans come, the survivors of Númenor coming, because he sees like the banner of the White Tree being raised up, and then he sees a populous city, which is Osgiliath from the past before Sauron took it over. And he sees basically what would be Aragorn coming to Minas Tirith later on in a black ship. And then sees a vision of a ship sailing into the west, which comes to pass later when he takes ship to go back there. And then, of course, he sees the Eye of Sauron looking for him. So he's seeing both the future, the present, and the past. And I do believe he also sees, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. A glimpse of it, anyway. And it says, the eye was rimmed with fire, but was itself glazed yellow as a cat's, watchful and intent, and the black slit of its pupil opened on a pit, a window into nothing. This is, of course, the Eye of Sauron, which the movies do get that right, but also wrong at the same time. Basically, the eye is symbolic of Sauron, but it's not a physical manifestation of Sauron. Sauron has two eyes, but both eyes are flaming eyes, basically. And you see this with Tevildo, the evil cat, in the Book of Lost Tales, which is the precursor to Sauron. And of course, when Tolkien does conceive of him finally, he's first called Thu the Wizard, and he has eyes like that as well. And there is a song by Rush called The Necromancer, where they basically reference this. A really good song. And of course, here at the end, the Ring of Adamant, Ninya is revealed to Frodo. He offers her the One Ring, but she rejects it. And because she rejects it, the ban that was placed upon her by the Valar, they lift. And her desire now is to return into the West. And so she will be allowed to do so. And he asks her at the end of the chapter why that he cannot see the minds of the other holders of the rings, and she says, well, you haven't tried. Three times you've only put the ring on your finger. These 3 times, of course, were the House of Tom Bombadil, at Weathertop, and in the Prancing Pony. Although I think in the movie, one of those is cut out, so you only see him put it on twice, but actually, in this point, it's 3 times. And there you have it. That is Chapter 7. Next, we will be saying goodbye to Lothlorien, so join me for that one. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time.